If you have a story you would like to share with me and that you would like me to read on this channel, simply click the link below to go to whatlurksbeneath.com and click here on Submit Your Story. If approved, your story will be added to the countless others in the database for others to read, and will also be premiered in a future episode on this channel. And now, back to the show. My name is George, and I live in the Orlando area. I'm a musician, and I play in clubs around the area. I've also been a huge fan of the outdoors, hiker, and camper, almost my entire life. I've heard stories about the Catman, or whatever you want to call it, all my life. I thought they were all hooey. About 18 months ago, I began dating a girl. We'll call her Stephanie. She's an artist, and she lives with her mom on a house right near Lake Lorna, here in Orlando. She paints at night and when she can get away, and if I'm not working, we'll take walks together. We've walked all over the area by our house and by the lake, which is roughly about 4 miles from the nearest street. One night, we had decided to go to around 11 p.m. to a little area on the far side of Lorna known as an older parking lot. We stopped there, started talking, and had our paints with us. That's when we had heard low growling from the woods, about 30 feet to our left. I told her, trying to downplay it and calm her down, it was probably just a feral hog, and we kept on painting. But the growling gradually got louder and sounded like it was coming from now behind us. But I kept telling her and trying to reassure her it was a feral hog. We had hiked to the edge of the lake, which was now at our feet, and the sound kept getting louder. And at this point, we could start to hear it moving through the woods. And now, it had moved completely to the edge of the woods, and it had gotten so loud, we could hear it making these strange murmuring noises. At this point, there was simply no denying what we were dealing with. It certainly was not a feral hog, because whatever it was sounded like it was much bigger than a dog. I tried to tell her maybe it's a big dog, but it had to be really big. We finally got back near the woods near her car, and I could hear whatever it was actually walking back with us, and not on 4 legs, but on 2, and it sounded like it was moving very fast and very quickly. I told Stephanie, see, it's probably maybe a bear or a dog. And me being stupid and trying to prove it to her, I finally got the courage and walked about 20 feet towards the woods, calling out, "Here, boy, come here," just to try and calm her down and prove that it was probably a dog. As I walked, calling louder and louder, I could hear growling and brush snapping and breaking as whatever this was getting closer and closer. I knew it wasn't a dog, but I had to do anything to try and convince my girlfriend that everything was going to be okay. As I got about 10 feet away from the tree line, I heard a huge thump. It sounded like something large smacked right into a tree, and in fact, I could see the trees a few ways back, shaking. And then this horrific howling scream shot out of the air. It sounded like an air horn, but so much more violent and distorted and loud. That was it for me. I ran back, grabbed Stephanie, and we got in the car and drove all the way back to her house. I told her mom what had happened, and she explained that we should probably not try and go to the woods again at night. We talked about it maybe being the possibility of the Catman. That's what we called it, although I'm not exactly sure what it was, because we never actually saw it. But to simply sit here and deny that it was nothing would be silly. Something was definitely following us in the woods and staying concealed, and the scream that thing let out, I have no idea what it could have been. The scream sounded like it came from a demon or something horrific, and it was so loud, it scared me. I've never encountered that with any animal before. It seemed so weird and out of place. I wanted to see your opinion on it. Could this have possibly been the Black Panther humanoid that I've been hearing about? Or is this something else entirely? I'm from Miami, originally, and currently, I work in the international business community. I've also been married for over 30 years and have raised 5 beautiful children with my wife. The purpose of this email is to not detail my past, but I saw your website, and I'm convinced that I've seen a panther. My sighting happened in the Everglades, and I was no more than 100 yards away. At the time, I was working as a salesman in Key West at the time and was in the southeast section of the Keys, which is between Key Largo and Big Pine Keys. One night, at around 11 p.m., I was driving back to Miami after working all day on the Keys. I was traveling on the road which runs along the eastern side. At that point during the night, it's pretty deserted, and my car appeared to be the only one on the road. I came around a slight bend in the road and noticed a pair of eyes about 4 car lengths in front of me. The headlights first illuminated what appeared to be eyes, and then the outline of a huge animal. I did not think of anything until I realized that it was an animal the size of a man and appeared to actually be crouched over. As I got within 4 to 5 car lengths of the animal, it began to stand erect and began to turn around facing the headlights of my car. The first thing I noticed was that its forearms were much longer than a man's. It didn't have a tail that I saw, and I imagined that if it did, and I just did not see it, it was so obscured by the darkness. It was exactly like you described them, except for one thing. It was jet black. Listen, I've seen many animals in the Everglades and have never seen an animal this black before. It's like it absorbed light. It stood erect on its hind legs and was easily over 6 feet tall. I actually stopped my car about 20 yards from it, unsure of what it would do, and it stared me down for maybe 10 seconds. I could hear its breathing even through my car. It was very heavy and labored, and I could see its chest swollen by its breath. It eventually turned around and took off into the Everglades on 2 legs. It kind of ran in an awkward manner, like its arms were long and barely able to hold them properly. It did not move like a man, but instead more kind of like a gorilla would, hunched over. The entirety of the episode lasted maybe 20 seconds from start to finish. But let me simply state that I was terrified. I turned around, driving back to Miami, then went directly home to my wife. It was a long way, but I wasn't risking going back this way. She asked what was wrong and I could not talk about it. I was so scared. I just simply explained to her that I was overly tired. This happened many, many years ago, and for the longest time, I've kept it in, too afraid to tell anybody about it for fear of ridicule. I know there are many large animals in the Everglades, but simply put, this was not a bear or an alligator. In fact, it was more like if you mixed a man with a black panther, or how a black panther would look if it was standing upright and then extending its long arms and giving it a larger head. I really have no idea how to process or compartmentalize what I saw really, because it fits so out of the realm of normal. And maybe calling it a panther isn't exactly accurate to what I saw, but I have no way to really fully explain it, so I hope this email did it justice. If you have any idea, or if you choose to read this to your audience, if they have any idea what they think this could be, I would love to know. A year ago, I was riding my bike through a wooded area about 15 minutes north of town, north of Tallahassee. I came to a small outcropping known locally as the Grotto. I was sitting in the sun on a wooden slab when I heard a scream from a nearby creek behind. I turned to see a huge black being perched atop a large boulder, its huge wings unfolded. It was looking at me, having large glowing red eyes, and I could tell that it was watching me for quite some time. At first, I thought I was in danger, but soon realized it was totally harmless. It was a very intelligent-looking being, but it was speaking to me almost telepathically. I noticed that its head was tucked back into its shoulders and mouth closed, like it was observing me and looking and watching my movements. While the sight of this creature did frighten me, I was more in awe and curious, and I even felt my body being drawn towards it, as if to get a better look. This huge creature immediately took to the air, flying off behind some trees. It was at least 8 feet tall, having huge black feathered wings. I also noticed it was male. I then noticed there were at least 4 other of these things circling in the sky, right near where it had disappeared, but far enough off that you could barely see them. The creature I saw had a gray face and almost had a very depressed expression on its face, like you could feel sorrow for it. Its skin was more reminiscent to stone, not actual stone, but the same color and hue, that very stark gray color. And its face was very human-like. All of the flying creatures that were circling flew down and disappeared. They were kind of far from the woods or far from the distance, so I couldn't really see where they went. Afterwards, I got on my bike and rode it back home. I told my family what I had seen. I got laughed at and was told I had spent far too many hours in the sun. A few days later, I saw the same 2 beings, a female and a male, flying up high in the sky, probably no more than 150 yards above the ground near the same area, going from north to southwest. It happened very quickly, and I was by myself, but judging by the shape and silhouette, I knew it was the same beings. I told my family about it again. They again called me crazy and told me to get psychiatric help. I will say this: I've never had any or been prone to any hallucinations or mental illness in my entire life or in my family line. This is the first time it's ever happened to me. I've never had experiences or encounters with ghosts, demonic beings, or entities. So, what could this possibly be? There's no way I would consider myself cracking up or going crazy, and you don't just see these things. I've also never taken a drug in my life, other than the occasional aspirin or ibuprofen. I'm just looking for some basic answers. I have a sighting to report from northern Florida and the Panhandle, Tallahassee to be exact, 1999. I had just finished loading my car from a Christmas party at a house of a friend, about 10:50 p.m. I was in a very nice area of suburbs, about 15 minutes from the Georgia border, near the airport. I had my headlights on, and as I was backing out of the driveway, I noticed the eyes of what appeared to be a very large, very dark, almost black panther or jaguar thing in there in the shrubbery. At this point, I called it a jaguar because that is what I thought it was. And then, things were wrong, because I noticed how high up it was sitting compared to the shrubbery around it. I realized it wasn't a jaguar, but had to be a human. Except the size and the type of animal or creature it was did not make sense to me. And so my next thought was perhaps it was somebody in a costume. And as I was almost out of the driveway, I looked over to my left and saw this thing for what it was. I figured I must have been slipped a drug or alcohol because this thing was walking on 2 feet, about 8 feet off the ground. It or he was big, and I noticed the hair first. So dark, it practically absorbed the light around it. It was very heavy looking, quite tall, and the hands, they were kind of like a human's hands but had very long fingers and claws attached to them, like if you took a cat paw and fused it with a human hand. It's pretty much half and half. He turned and we looked at each other, and we locked eyes. This thing was no shorter than 8 feet tall. It was tall. I had to practically look up at it. I did not see a face, but the eyes were dark. At the time, I thought it was a man in a suit, as I said, and scared me. I don't know what it was, but I know it was not a man in a costume. I would tell people about it, but I know they wouldn't believe me, so I usually just didn't say anything. It was there for about 5 seconds, and then it was gone. And then, this feeling came over me, almost like I was in danger, or like I was being hunted. But after it had disappeared, I never saw it again, and I also got the impression that this thing has been hanging around in the vicinity of my house and neighborhood, watching me, watching my friends and family, waiting for the right moment. I have never heard of a humanoid jungle cat before, so I'm not sure if that's what you can call this, though I'm certain I have heard of a panther, but never a panther-like human. And while I don't feel like there is anything conclusive about this sighting of a humanoid, I have never told my family about it. In fact, me writing this now is the first time it's ever happened. Years ago, while I was camping in northern Florida near a lake, I had heard something that shook me to my literal core. I awoke in the middle of the night and could clearly make out loud footsteps of a huge bipedal creature. It was walking from my tent over in the direction of my car, which was only parked about 30 feet away from my tent. As it walked by my tent, it let out this terrifying shriek or scream unlike anything I'd ever heard before. I was terrified. I grabbed my gun tightly, loaded it with one round, and sat there awake the rest of the night. With my back facing the cypress tree, I was listening for sounds of anything out of the ordinary. Eventually, the adrenaline had worn off and I must have fallen asleep. The next morning, I got up, exhausted, and got in my car and left, taking everything with me, obviously. I was so terrified from the night before because the sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard. In fact, the closest thing that I can compare it to are the calls of the infamous Beast of the Boggy Creek. But this was not a call, it was more like a horrendous shriek or scream. I was so scared that I was afraid it was going to come back. What struck me, though, as very odd was the fact that it seemed to be coming from the west. There was nothing out in that direction except woods and swamp and then the Gulf Coast. I had a strong feeling that it had come from the marshes and the swamps. It seemed very big, much larger than a black bear. And I've tried all this time to rationalize what I heard and thought it might be some kind of ape. But there are no apes or monkeys in Florida that I'm aware of. I have no idea what it was, but maybe, just maybe, it's the infamous skunk ape. Whatever it was sounded like it was heavy and walking around on two legs. I felt like I could have shot it, but who knows what would have happened to me. Maybe I wouldn't be here writing this out. The only reason I didn't shoot it was because it didn't feel like the right moment, like it did not attack me. And I don't want to use lethal force unless I absolutely have to. I keep guns for protection, not to kill. And I have no idea how far this account of my night will even get. And maybe, just maybe, I had an encounter with the Beast of Boggy Creek. Maybe it worked itself all the way down here in northern Florida. I'm no expert on skunk apes or Bigfoot, but is it possible that this is what it could have been? This occurred in 2008, a Christmas night here in the Florida Everglades. My buddy and I were hunting around. We had hunted numerous times before. Kind of an odd thing to be doing on Christmas night, right? Well, we love hunting and we figured, after spending time with the family, why not get together and celebrate our Christmas time by doing a little bit of scouting and hunting. After a couple of hours, we found ourselves to be the only ones around. Not a surprise since we usually are, but we were so far out. There was nobody around for at least a couple miles in all directions. We decided to continue to scout for another hour or two, and then head to his trailer to get some grub. It was now about 8 p.m. We had heard a chilling scream come from the thicket behind us. It's unlike anything I'd ever heard. We just stared at each other in disbelief. About another minute later, another different scream came from a separate area in the thicket. We started walking towards the nearest tree line, but heard movement in the brush behind us. It sounded large. We stopped to see what it was, thinking we might get lucky and might be able to snag a deer. My buddy noticed something black moving throughout the thicket. I could not see what it was, but he did. We stood there quietly, while these loud screams kept coming from the thicket behind us. What I assume now were calls and responses. These screams were terrifying. We kept an eye on the area to see if we could spot any movement, but could not see a thing. We pressed onwards towards the tree line on the way back to the trailer. As these screams continued coming from the thicket, when we reached the tree line, we looked back at the brush for just a moment, still not seeing anything. And then movement started up again. You could hear something big moving around, thrashing and stomping on stuff, and it was quickly moving in our direction. And finally, just before we entered the tree line, we were able to successfully see it. Whatever it was had massive shoulders, probably 4 feet wide, and that's not an exaggeration. It looked human-like, but very dark in color. It had a strange crouched stance that a human could never really mimic. It moved with purpose, slowly moving forward, but looked like it was being sly. It could have easily moved much faster. Its movements seemed very calculated, like it was a very intelligent being, and a face that was very reminiscent to a human, but more Neanderthal-like. The eyes that we saw were different. They were dark. It was like it was trying to observe us, curiously, but not sure of how to proceed. The whole experience was incredibly unnerving. We made our way back to his trailer and told his girlfriend and son to secure the gate. When they were done, they came in the trailer with us. We were all scared, I'm not going to lie. It was a completely new experience. We ended up staying up all night, watching movies to try and keep our mind off what happened. We knew we had to get out of the woods the next day, but did not want to go back to the thicket. We eventually got some sleep, and the first thing in the morning, did a little more scouting around, but not much. By the way, the area where we had this encounter was roughly 250 yards away from his trailer. I don't know what it was, but I've never encountered anything like that in all my years. It still kind of haunts me to this day. Back in 2003, my grandfather and I were deer hunting in the Florida Everglades. We had been sitting in our blind since about 5 a.m., and it was now approaching 8 a.m. We had decided to see if we could see any deer moving to another source of water. We got down from the blind, got in my grandfather's truck, and drove to where I had seen a small pond earlier in our hunt. When we got there, I noticed something that looked like antlers in the reeds. We got out and my grandfather called out, but there was no movement by the object or any other type of sound. We approached the thing, and when we got closer, we could see that whatever it was more like that of a black panther, but way bigger than any panther I had seen. It stood up, and I realized in that moment, the antlers were actually coming from this creature, but they were more like appendages coming out of its head. It turned around and faced me, and although it looked somewhat like a panther, its face was more like a huge baboon, much meaner and evil looking. It hissed and had fangs like a cat or a panther, and lunged at both of us. Both of us ran, in complete and total fear, back to the truck. We didn't see the thing again, and returned back to our blind. We never mentioned the thing to anybody about 2 years ago. We were in the same general area when we came across another group of hunters. I was thinking about the thing we had seen and told one of the hunters about it. I told him I had no idea what it was, but it reminded me of a cross of a human, a black panther, and a baboon. He claims that he had heard stories about something like that and was kind of concerned about running into it. He said that he had been told by some other hunters during their walks that they had even been chased by it. I have never been back to hunt in the Everglades since seeing that thing. My boss and a friend of his told me they saw this 8-foot-tall, black-furred creature out of a camp in the Everglades several years back. They were lying on the ground near their tent, and it came up to their hiding spot, sniffed around for a while, and kept walking. They said it looked like the size of a baboon, and they said they got a pretty good look at it from about 100 yards away and watched it as it walked off into the darkness. They had said they stayed up the rest of the night and went home the following day. They were supposed to stay another 3 days, but they were too freaked out by what they had seen. They never really told anybody about it and did not go to that same hunting spot again for quite some time. It certainly seems something worthy of investigation. This particular sighting happened on September 17th, 2017, and they best described it as a black, baboonish, panther-looking creature with long, skinny claws, and then it walked and moved robotically and awkwardly. They're still very unsure, but still freaked out to this day to go back to that same area in the Everglades. I am a former Navy veteran. I have an older brother who works with the NSA. I had been stationed at the Naval Submarine Base in Kings Bay, Georgia, as a senior communications officer aboard the USS Domingo Sanchez, SSBN 624. The other 2 officers, named above, and myself, each had separate accounts with what was at the time a totally unknown creature. The first encounter was during the early fall of 1999. There were 3 of us on the 3973 watch, 2 officers and a chief petty officer. It was a few moments after 2300 hours, and we were approximately 120 southeast of St. Augustine, Florida, when we began to see a huge black animal moving in the middle of the ocean. We were traveling a minimum of 65 knots, and the creature or being did not move. As we got closer, I realized it had not moved at all because of the submerged lighting, which can illuminate an area of 40 feet in diameter. We thought it might be a manatee or a whale from the distance, but when we got closer, we realized it was neither of those creatures, but much larger. It was not a manatee or a whale. It reminded me personally of a sea lion mixed with a human being, and it was as black as coal. It also had a bowl-shaped head, and the eyes were very dull and strange. The creature also appeared to have arms and hands that were kind of webbed. We came within about 15 yards of it. We all agreed we all saw the same thing and were not hallucinating. None of us were in any way intoxicated. We called Norfolk and said they had heard of any creature like this. We'd been trained to report unknown contacts in the water, so we did. After we reported the incident and it was logged, they launched a boat to investigate. That was the last time the creature was seen. Captain O'Donnell later made us promise to never talk about it again. And now, I live in a small town in Michigan. I'm being forced to sell my land. I'm 67 since this happened. I've never stopped wondering where the creature came from, what it wanted, and why it was so interested in the Sanchez. This second incident is even more compelling. It came from a Forest U.S. Navy submarine officer who in 2002 was in command of a nuclear submarine traveling in the Indian Ocean. The following is his account. I am a former U.S. Navy submarine officer. I was in command of one of the U.S. Navy's most advanced nuclear submarines, the USS Jimmy Carter, SSN-23, which is so advanced as to be classified. And before that I served aboard the USS Honolulu, SSN-718, also nuclear-powered and likewise classified. On April 24th, 2002, we surfaced at an international airport off the coast of East Africa. The following day, we got underway for the Arabian Sea, operating Enduring Freedom. This was the time when the U.S. military was heavily engaged in Afghanistan, following the 9/11 attacks by Al-Qaeda. For 17 days, we traveled submerged, with only few hours here and there at periscope depth to send and receive encrypted traffic and to top off air and get some fresh air, since our crew spends most of their time living and working aboard a submarine. At night, when we were at periscope depth, we were totally blacked out. This keeps sonar from detecting us while we can still detect other ships using our passive sonar equipment. On May 16th, 2002, we were standing down from Enduring Freedom on the surface of the Arabian Sea at the 2 o'clock position, 180 degrees, relative to the port of Oman, when a lookout reported a black object in the water at a range of about 5 miles. I was on the bridge at the time, as was the navigator of the watch, who then assumed the duties of the officer of the deck. It was about 0200 hours. We closed in on the object for about 2, since it was not moving, and finally came alongside it, about 150 feet away. The visibility from our bridge was approximately 50 feet because of the sea state, so we ran across it with our running lights on. As we got closer, we realized it was not a life form, but a large black craft in the water. In fact, it was so black, it looked to be almost impossible to see through. It was just floating there, and I realized this was a craft that we did not recognize. It did not look to be made by man. It was almost just gliding there, and we went to about 80 feet in depth in order to get out the stratus that was hanging over the surface presumably stirred up by the submarine's own screws. Within an hour, this thing was still floating alongside us, but began to move toward us. So I had the OOD fire a warning shot across its bow. This is a signal to go away, or else. We were supposed to use a signal that would also warn the shipping that it was an area, but since there were none, I do not think the message was in any way less clear than the one we had actually sent. We were then instructed that if this machine came towards us again, we were to use the water hose guns to push it away by firing blasts of water at it. As we're about to do that, this machine or ship began to glimmer and glow, and we noticed it appeared to be glowing this orange red, and then it had just disappeared. As far as what happened, we were ordered by the US Navy to head north and stay out of the area for a good 2 hours. We could not send or receive any encrypted traffic during that period. We were warned that we were not to repeat, not to use weapons unless this thing came back and appeared hostile. Fortunately, it never did. Because we were ordered to stay silent, I cannot tell you who gave us this order, other than that it was in the form of an encrypted flash traffic. After we emerged from being silent, I reported our encounter to the higher-ups. They would not acknowledge it. I think they classified it as top secret or something. Like I said, we were warned that we were not supposed to acknowledge it at all. All I can say is something very strange happened, but I cannot tell you what it was. There are those who believe that there are other intelligent species in the universe, that possibly this was an alien craft. Perhaps it was aliens. I'm not sure. But I do believe that whatever technology we encountered was far more advanced than our own, that we would be encountering them in the actual sea under the water. I have a feeling that something in the future will change the way we think. In 2005 or 2006, in my backyard south of Orlando, Florida, in Lake County, what I saw was very tall with red eyes and a beak. My mother was outside on her porch, looking around and saw something in her yard. At first, she thought it was something strange like a bird, but it was so tall and the fact that it had a beak really threw her off. It was crouched at first, but as it stood erect and started moving really fast on two legs, my mother and I began screaming. Now, my mother's friend saw something very similar in the backyard of her own home here in Winter Garden, Florida. She too saw something she could not explain. The best way I can describe it is it was kind of a huge humanoid figure, large head, no neck, long thin arms, and a wingspan. Crouched down, from the distance, it appeared to be a large carnivorous bird, but once it stood erect, we could see it was in fact nothing like that. While the sighting did bother me, my mom and her friend both claim they don't know what it was and they hope to not see it again. I've talked to her and she remembers the story like it was yesterday. My mother's friend also claims to have seen it multiple times before, but I can't vouch for that. All I can vouch for is my own and my mother's sighting. My story is not that extraordinary, but is incredibly strange and frightening. I had a girlfriend, about 10 years ago. Her last name was Wilson. Her family had a cabin up in Tennessee. I went down and backed up to Georgia to see her several times. When I visited her family in the cabin one night, she and me took a late night walk. I was totally oblivious to what was going on. I was more or less at the time more focused on the beautiful surroundings. The woods were so incredibly peaceful, and there was this soft glow created by the moonlight filtering through the trees. She told me that her family had experienced some strange encounters at the cabin. I didn't believe her. She called her parents, who were at home in Tennessee, to confirm her story, and they indeed confirmed it. There were incidents of people's clothes being shredded, food mysteriously disappearing, scratch marks and scrapes appearing on the side of the cabin, animals being found dead all around with their heads cut off. Twisted off, actually. They had seen some sort of strange animal in the pond behind their cabin, although I still was very skeptical of what she was telling me. As we're walking back to the cabin, two werewolf-like creatures appeared. They were both about 6 feet tall, hairy, and making a very loud growling grunting noise. We were in such shock by what we were seeing. My girlfriend began to cry. I saw one of these things moving in my direction, and I thought I was a goner. So I froze, and these things quickly disappeared. Come to find out, whatever animal we had just seen moving through the wild were actually chasing 2 large buck running through. We wouldn't learn this till 2 days later when we walked in that direction of where these creatures were going to, and we found the 2 carcasses of 2 large, or what was left of them, bucks. And I'm serious when I describe them as werewolf creatures. They looked just like something you would see out of a movie, walking upright like a man, covered in hair and massive wolf-like heads. They moved so quickly, we couldn't really take in much, but it happened fast. It was more than enough to scare my girlfriend and I at the time. That sighting alone, it changed me from a skeptic to a believer. And any time we've told her parents about it, they always call those creatures the keeper of the keys to the woods. Now, this girlfriend and I ended up breaking up in 2014, but her parents and I were close for quite some time, even after the breakup. I have not spoke to them in at least 4 years. But among these creatures, her parents had seen all sorts of crazy weird animals all around that cabin. Strange creatures. I explained our encounter in depth and they were not surprised. Apparently, they believe that whole area around the cabin has this supernatural quality or energy to it that they can't quite put their finger on. There's something very, very wrong. So, were these wild animals? Were they supernatural? Were they demons? Questions that I do not have the answers for. This is a night I'll never forget. I was with a friend in a rural area just outside of Tampa. The area is quite rural, with a few houses here and there, and some Everglades. Anyway, it was about 2 a.m., and we're at a small party, nothing special. We decided to go for a drive. Don't worry, our DD was sober. I usually don't go for drives at night, but this time, I was totally in the mood. So, we get in my car and start driving, heading for a random place we don't know anything about. We'd been driving around for a while, so we ended up coming to a wide, straight road. It was then we both saw something standing in the middle of the road. What we thought was a man, but ended up being something else. Right where the road curve starts, we skidded, smacking into it. We stopped and both got out to look at what we had just hit. And what we saw is something I'll never forget. We were shocked and speechless. What we thought, it was a woman. Then, it turned into this black mass. Its face turned into a woman's to bone white. The skin stretched tightly over the face and was very pale. The eyes were wide open and black with no color. The irises completely black. She or it had thin, long hair down to her back, but was becoming bald at the top of her head as her flesh fed away. It was thin, and we can now see its ribs. There were more than probably 5'10". My friend and I just kept freaking out, screaming, not sure if we'd hit an innocent bystander, or if we'd hit some sort of experiment, or possibly a demon, since this thing or her was completely naked, but we saw no signs of it being a woman, aka breasts or the figure. It was just this naked, pale being with a face and head that looked similar to that of a woman's. But after we hit it, like I said, its features began changing, and she or it kind of just appeared out of nowhere on the road. We quickly raced back into the car, driving for about 10 minutes before stopping again and getting out of the car to have a cigarette. After 10 more minutes of talking and trying to rationalize what had just happened, my friend kept asking me, "Do you hear that?" when he suddenly turned and started freaking out. He told me to listen carefully, and after a few more minutes, we both heard it again. It was like a screeching bird noise, but it was as if somebody was screaming and laughing at the same time. Very bizarre and very hard to describe accurately. Yes, we were freaked out. We both wanted to turn around and see where it was coming from. We decided it's best to get back in the car and go back to the party. After another 20 minutes of driving, I decided to take a small road that I saw on the way there, getting us back quicker, or at least what I thought was a shortcut. We were driving for about another 10 minutes now, when I saw something moving near our car. I didn't think about it twice and kept driving. After looking in the rearview mirror, I saw the thing. It was that same being that we had hit earlier, stumbling out behind the bush onto the road, coming in our direction. I shouted, flooring the car even more. And then, as we sped up, this being went from a stumbling drunk posture to an athletic sprinter running, easily getting up to 40, 50, 60 miles an hour. And now, my friend and I are both on the verge of a mental breakdown, not sure what to process what's going on or what's even happening. I swear, looking back in the rearview mirror was probably the most scariest thing. All you see is this black figure running right at us with these two glowing orange eyes. I floored the car as much as I could, and fortunately the road we were on was pretty straight with minimal amounts of bends or curves, even though it was considered technically a back road. At one point or another, the thing chasing us, that was almost right up on our car, completely disappeared. I probably went faster than I ever have in the car back to the party. Didn't even bother to park properly. My friend and I just ran out and went and hung out in the party. We figured we were much safer around people than being out there by ourselves, around that thing that was trying to get us. We got some pretty strange looks when we came back to the party. People were probably wondering why we were shaking and so pale and freaked out. But we huddled together. We did not do really much the rest of the night, while everybody else around us was taking questionable substances, drinking more than their fair share of booze. We were pretty much being Debbie Downers, talking quietly and just trying to come to realization of what just happened, not consuming anything. I think we even got mocked here or there, and decided it would be best to stay at this party, or at least the house, until daylight. Once daylight came, we went out to the car. And keep in mind, neither of us have drank since before this happened, and we're both completely sober. We also hadn't slept either. We literally stayed up all night long, talking and just trying to keep each other sane. After going back out to our car in the early morning hours once sunlight had come, there was this strange black substance all over the front and back of the car. It was kind of like snot almost, except black, or tar, I guess would be a better way to describe it. I'm not exactly sure where it came from, but it was at the same small dent where I hit this person or thing, and also on the back part of the vehicle. I'm not claiming to have answers, but whatever on earth happened that night scared the living hell out of me and my friends. I still get the heebie-jeebies just thinking back to it, and typing this up wasn't exactly easy. Okay, so my encounter wasn't exactly paranormal, but still pretty creepy. Anyway, here's what I experienced. I live in Miami, and yes, there are a lot of crazy things out here, but I don't know what this was. I'm sure of that. I'm around the area of Southwest 8th Street and Southwest 73rd Avenue. Now, I will come right out and say it. I am a huge lover of paranormal. However, it does scare me. This encounter happened a few months ago while I was driving. It was closer to midnight. I remember that. And I was around a block from my house. I turned around to see if there was any streetlights or anything, and I see this huge black figure racing behind my car. It was more than 10 meters behind me. I could not make out what it was because it was so black. I mean, we're talking pitch black. I could make out the size of it. I saw that it was very tall and skinny, and kind of looked like it had a long neck. I actually tell people about this all the time and tell them that it reminded me like this big demonic bird-looking thing. But the thing is, if I use the term bird, it sounds completely silly. I know this story's short and I apologize for that, but maybe somebody in the comment section can help me figure out what exactly I saw. My mother saw something or somebody while she was driving in the Everglades City, near Alligator Alley. She said it looked like a tall person, but it had very small arms. and its lower body was very reminiscent to that of a large wolf. Its body was solid, but then disappeared in the thick Everglades. She said it was very solid, not like a shadow at all. She claimed that it was very dark, more like almost a solid black, and had large amber eyes. Makes you wonder what's really out there. I was lying on the sofa, a chair and end table, closest to the front door of my home in the Everglades. I slept with all the lights on in the house, but the porch light was off. I was woken suddenly by the feeling that someone or something was standing on the porch, looking into the house. I lay there, listening. When I finally looked back at the clock, I briefly opened my eyes and saw the time was about 3:37 a.m. Then I laid back down and listened, and felt again. I then felt as if something was looking down at me. I then felt and heard the sound of something huge moving away from the house, as if there was a herd of cattle, only heavier and more massive, but from a singular source. The sound was similar to the way a horse makes when it shakes, only much louder. That's the only way I can describe it. I thought it was early in the morning. It was probably the ground shaking from a 4.0 earthquake that it felt a minute before. I was kind of asleep. I believed that what I felt was a wake-up call from nature. I refused to go outside until daylight. My girlfriend found that I left my kitchen window open and the linen closet unlocked when I went to bed. In the morning, we checked the porch. Nothing looked like it had been moved. I know that around here the ground gets wet, and we do have sinkholes that are on the land, but I don't think that's what this was. I believe that this was related to a haunting. This is why I would like to investigate the paranormal side activity first, before jumping to the conclusion that possibly a demon or a creature is involved. I know it might sound backwards, but if somebody were to call me about their experience, and I determined the location was a haunted location, I could usually just say it's because of a haunting. I've always tried to adapt this methodology to try and make a determination on what may be involved before going in and saying that I think it's a ghost or cryptid or what have you. So I'm really curious to know what your opinion is, and if you know anything about hauntings in Florida, or maybe this was a creature watching me. After all, you never know what happens out here in the Everglades. And this is outside of civilization, and in the midst of wilderness. I'd be interested in hearing more about this. As of now, it's all I have. If something else shows up, I'll pass it along. It all started about 3 months ago. At first, I didn't think much of it, but the more and more I began hearing the noise, I could not deny it, and would have to accept that something paranormal was happening in my home in Florida. You see, I very recently moved into a new home here in Plant City. About a week after we moved in, I was lying in my room as my husband was watching TV, playing PS4 in the living room. The TV in my room was turned off, so I could hear the TV in the living room going. I heard what I thought was a cat, crying to get my attention, but we don't have any cats. I assumed it was a stray. When I would call my cat, or the cat, the crying would stop and start again. I thought it was strange. Considering there were no stray cats around, and where the sound was coming from, there was clearly no cat, since it was coming from right outside my window, and after inspecting, there was no cat around. Now this would go on for weeks, and every time right around 3 to 3:30 in the morning. Then, after a couple more weeks, it turned into a baby crying, except the crying was coming from outside my room, not out the window, but outside the room. So I would open my door and listen, and the sound would always stop. It was eerie. After a while, the sound would then move to the top of the stairs, where mysteriously, almost like clockwork, the crying would stop altogether. Then, on some nights, the crying would come from the living room, and then, easily, the most disturbing sound woke me up one evening. I was lying in bed. My husband was snoring. I was reading a book. It was, I think, right around 11:45 p.m., and when I heard choking, but not choking, it sounded like a woman gagging and choking, almost as if she was in a confrontation. as if somebody was choking the life out of her. I jumped up out of my bed, throwing my book on my husband, running out, and immediately stopping. I kind of realized in that moment, I'm pretty sure my house is haunted. Soon after that started, strange things began happening all around the house. And I'm not just talking about paranormal things. I'm talking about strange entities appearing outside our window or appearing outside the front door. In fact, one night, I was out of town when I got a call from my husband and he was in hysterics. Apparently, a kid knocked on the door and was acting strange. When my husband tried to get more information out of this kid, he acted almost zombie-like. And then, my husband says he saw his eyes, and they were completely pitch black, and his face was pale. My husband was so terrified, he slammed the door in this kid's face, locking the door. This kid afterwards kept knocking, and then eventually stopped. So, I don't know what it is, but there's some pretty creepy things going on around here. Fortunately, in the past couple weeks, things have kind of died down, but who knows if they'll start back up again. I don't know how to quite explain this. Maybe it's a glitch in the Matrix. Maybe it's aliens. I don't know. You can decide. So, I was leaving my friend's house at around 1:30 in the morning. I was pretty tired and ready to go home. I had to drive down a 2-lane highway to get back to my house. I was probably, about 2 miles at most from my home. I was driving down this road at roughly 55 miles an hour. 2 other cars in front of me. I then see this bright light in the sky to my right, so I turn out of reaction to look at it. It was way up in the sky, several miles out in the distance, and I assumed it was a star, but then it got really bright very quickly, and it starts slowly moving across the sky. I stay focused on it and watching it move, and out of nowhere, this giant black object comes almost out of nowhere and goes straight right through my car and the car in front of me, like it was a translucent figure, and it can just go through objects. It was like wormhole time travel, but it only lasted about a whole second. It was a strange sensation, and it's almost like I had just woken up. It was bizarre. Anyway, I get to my house, run inside, and I notice it's almost 6 a.m. Confused, I go outside, lock my door, and look at my computer. It's 5:58. I had left my friend's house right about 1:30, and it takes about 30 minutes to get home. So you're telling me that somehow 4 hours went by without me even blinking. How is this even possible? Any idea what this was? I would never make light of anybody's experience, but I'm sorry, but this for my very self, it just seems so bizarre. On the evening of the 21st of June, 2015, just past 5 p.m., I experienced something I cannot explain, and I need some help figuring out what it was. Currently, I'm in Pensacola, and I was driving back from the Gulf Breeze on scenic Highway 98, maybe no more than 5 miles from home. It was currently dusk, but between dark enough for headlights. I had spotted movement off to my left on the road, and noticed a deer had run across. Deer are common here. Seconds later, what ran out after it was not a deer. It was tall, 8 to 9 feet tall and thin, but muscular. It wasn't as bulky, but more muscular. It had wings, and they kind of drooped past down its knees, and a longer neck. It also appeared to have a beak, and eyes that seemed to reflect the light. It did not seem to fly, but run on 2 legs. After it ran after the deer, it was scary, and I screamed. I was glad to be able to be in my car and speed up and get away from it. I then had a secondary experience in southern Alabama where I was stationed for 2 years. This was in Fort Rucker. A friend and I were driving in the late evening. We saw something in the sky we cannot explain. We were driving on a dirt trail and saw this dark bird-like thing fly over our car. It was big enough to fly over our truck and enshadowed the entire thing. It didn't flap its wings though. It more kind of glided and was very black in color. During the time it flew over, it did not seem to be moving its legs, but rather gliding, being perfectly still. It's possible that we did not see its feet due to the way it was gliding, but I can't remember much more definition or detail than that. And we both saw it, and we could both testify to that. So it wasn't just one of us just saying things. I thought it was worth mentioning for anybody reading this. I read about the Minnesota Bigfoot story and wanted to share a very similar one with you. I hope you enjoy it. I cannot say that I believe in the big creatures with hairy bodies, but I have a story to share. I lived on the edge of a federally owned forest in Minnesota for well over 20 years now. There's always a lot of wildlife, so I'm used to hearing strange animals and seeing deer and raccoons, etc. One day, my husband and I were sitting on our back deck watching the deer meander around. We would often see woodchucks, rabbits, foxes, a whole lot of birds. It was early morning, and we had sat down to have coffee. As we're talking, the deer seemed to all move in the same direction, as if away from something. We looked to see what they were looking at and noticed a figure walking on the trail that we call Deer Trail. My husband claims it was a bear. I said no way. It was too tall and moved closer. It looked like a huge man, but walking on 2 feet. We both just stared in disbelief. It was taller than my husband, very visibly, which he's 6'4", swinging its arms with wiggle to the hips. We had the window open, and we're just about to say something to each other when my husband demands we close the window so it doesn't hear us. I don't want to look anymore. I closed the window, ran inside and peeked through the blinds. It stopped and looked around, squatted down and picked something up, then moved away. The deer were still all huddled together, and we couldn't see what it was squatting to pick up, but the deer certainly reacted to whatever it was. They seemed really spooked. What really got my husband was that it must have smelt the coffee and maybe that's what attracted it. Okay, funny I know, but maybe Bigfoot is a morning person. I have a story for you. Maybe you can help me make sense of it. Last October, I was hunting in the Pine Island State Forest here in west central Minnesota, near the town of Rush City, probably 80 miles west of Minneapolis. It is posted, so you need a permit. Anyhow, I had scouted a spot, a place where I'd seen deer and turkey for years now, so I knew the location was prime, right on the edge of a smaller lake. Not a body of water really, but just a large marshy field that was totally surrounded by thicker woods. It was still morning and I was walking, noiseless, with my bow drawn. I had literally heard a cracking sound, like something underfoot. So I stopped my tracks and stood still. I thought I had stepped on a branch, but when I looked down where I had stepped, I ended up seeing something that I never want to see again. Now, it was about 50 yards from me and appeared to be squatting down on its hind legs, eating something, what was probably a small animal, and staring right back into my eyes. It appeared to be about 5 feet tall and reminded me of a large black bear with long shaggy mane around its neck. There were no snout really. Its eyes were black. The face was much flatter, like a human, but its nose was pointed, and no, not a snout. It had ears too, and its arms were very long, looking human-like, and it had a large belly. Its butt was also sticking out. I was shocked. I think in reaction, I slowly raised my bow and fired an arrow at it, which I realize is probably the dumbest thing you can do in hindsight. I mean, I was scared out of my wits. I wanted to get out of there, but as soon as I fired it, it let out a scream that I had never heard before, like a cross between a coyote dying and a mountain lion. It was a high-pitched scream that started off soft, but came on strong and was almost like an alarm call. After that, it sounded like maybe a half dozen others responded to the scream. I could hear the response. I shuddered. I ran out of the woods and got into my truck as fast as I could. I didn't tell anybody about it. My wife and kids would think I'm nuts. In fact, I was in the woods again just last week. Not hunting, just going in and out of there again. I'm not letting my kids out of my sight. That thing might want revenge for shooting at it. My husband and I had taken in a stray dog that we found along the road. I named him Norman because he looked like a sweet boy, and my uncle was also named Norman. I really loved my uncle. We had Norman for about a month when my husband claimed he had seen a large upright canine running across our field on our property. He said it was dark gray, very lanky, a canine in body and head shape, but it seemed to be attracted to Norman. Not in a breeding sense, but the smell of Norman probably brought it in. Norman always seemed to have this strange canine odor on him. I can't describe it. It's not wet dog, it was something different. I wonder if there is a connection. We also kept Norman outside in this cage-like kennel, but this thing would come around at night to where his wired-in cage would be kept. Our male husky, Ember, would occasionally growl at it through the window. And then one night, Norman let out the most horrific scream I've ever heard a dog let out. Ember was inside and our son had gone to bed. Now it was just me and my husband. I grabbed my rifle. My husband ran out to Norman. When we got out there, what I saw will stay with me forever. A most horrific creature standing on its back legs, looking right at us. Its eyes looked dull and smoky as if they were blind. It was tall and extremely skinny, and had a head that was a little too big for its body. Its fur was dull and unkempt, much like that of a mop. My husband and I slowly retreated back into the house, with me in the lead with my rifle. It stood there for a moment, looking back at us, then back at Norman, then slowly walking into the brush, as if its plans had been foiled and it was caught. It was contesting for the dog, Norman. I never fired at it, but maybe I should have, in retrospect. The next 2 nights, it came around again, and by the 5th night, it was completely gone. The paw prints left behind were strange. I think it was an upright canine, but I don't know what it was. I've never seen anything like it in my life. Never saw it again after these events, and I believe that the creature my husband saw and what we both saw that night are 2 different creatures. My friend and I saw a very large, hairy, human-like creature at about 9 p.m. on October 17th, 2011, approximately 40 feet from our campsite. We were at a campsite along Highway 16 in Kitson County, Minnesota. It was a large clearing in the wooded area. The creature was in the tree line, facing us and seemed to be observing us. It was very tall and very hairy. I estimate about 7 feet. It also ran on 2 legs. It had arms and legs that were very long and skinny, but muscular as well. The head was cone-shaped, like that of an alien's. It was standing a lot too. By the way its legs were, it just seemed to be observing us. It was about 9 p.m., so it was not light outside, by any means. As well, we were both a little shaken up and in disbelief. Since we couldn't get the best look at it, we realized, though, it was very scary. We packed up, left, and came back to our home. We never saw the creature move, but just watched us walk back to our trailer. I still have all these questions about what we saw and why. I've also heard the previous incident in Fergus Falls, and think we may have seen the same creature. A friend of mine, many years ago, had a strange experience here in Kitson County, Minnesota. This was in the late fall or early winter. He was driving a friend home late at night. It was very cold outside. There were no moon, just stars. He was driving a pickup truck. They were about halfway between towns and were driving on an old 2-track ice road, open for winter vehicle travel. He said there were no trees at all in the area, and they were, except for one spot that they passed a while before this experience. They have always thought that might be the same spot. On this ice road, you're basically literally driving on top of ice. He says they were traveling about 45 miles an hour, coming to a crawl, and they came to this huge bipedal thing walking across the road. He said they were surprised that they had not seen it coming, as they should have been close enough to see it in their headlights approaching the road. He said they were so scared but just could not take their eyes off it, saying nothing to each other at all. He claims it was around 8 feet tall, covered in hair or fur of some kind, and was moving at normal speed. They were close enough to see its eyes, but they did not reflect in the headlights at all. Like an animal's eyes would, they were dumb eyes, he claimed. He said the creature was looking straight ahead, and he got the impression it may have seen their headlights before the lights even came close to it. They were terrified but also puzzled. They said it was very clearly bipedal and that it was enormous. They could make out clothing like fur on its shoulders. He said, as they passed it, and he was thinking that if it was going to do something to them, then it would have done it by then, since they were so close. The other guy in the truck was staying quiet, but my friend said he was freaking out. I heard this story when I was a young kid, and I think my friend David was about 19 at the time. He has never found anyone to talk about it since he's not that much of a believer. But I had always heard the seriousness in his voice when he told me the story. They had not smoked, done drugs, or done anything that would have altered their minds or vision in any way. They have never told anybody about this, but I know they have never forgotten. Wedge is their last name, and I hope that you might have heard something similar. I've tried to Google this and have not found anything else on it. Thank you. I was talking with a lady in Beaver Bay, Minnesota, who I have known for many years. She told me that her husband and Dan had a sighting in Itza County. She gave me his phone number. I called Dan, who wrote about his Bigfoot experience. Here's what he had to say. I had been at a friend's cabin near Clark Lake, Minnesota, and had gone for a hike. The sun was setting, so I decided to head back to the cabin. As I was walking back, I was startled by a figure that was crouched down and hiding between the trees. It immediately stood up, looking in my direction. I looked at it for a few seconds. It made a grunting sound and then turned and walked into the woods. I knew it was not a bear, because it was walking on 2 feet, crouching down and not on 4. I ran back to the cabin to tell my friend who was there. He said, "Okay, were you drinking?" I told him I wasn't, and he laughed at me. "I was probably more sober than you are right now," I told him. I spent the night at another friend's house in Deer River. The following day, I went back to the cabin with 2 other friends. We found large footprints that were almost 20 inches in length. The prints, however, were farther away from the cabin than what I initially saw the night before. I also saw a tree that was ripped in half. It looked like something had torn it right down the middle. It was easily about 18 inches in diameter. My family and I were out on a camping trip to Camp Chippewa on the evening of June 4th, 2012. We were going to get to the campground by 10 p.m. As we got there and began setting up our tents, we had a small campfire and began hearing a very loud howl coming from what seemed like the direction of the creek. I commented to my wife about the noise and said it did not sound like any animal I've ever heard. The howl was continuous and loud. I've spent a lot of time camping and hiking and never heard anything like it. It sounded like a wolf, but the howl was much longer. At first, my wife and I looked at each other but did not say much. Then we heard it again, moments later, this time very near the campground. My wife was getting nervous and we were getting ready to go into the tent when I heard yet another howl. It was very close, sounding right outside the clearing we were camping in. My wife was about to go into the tent when we heard a loud crashing noise. I thought it might be a tree falling in the woods. I looked in the direction of the crashing and saw a very large object moving through the woods parallel to the campground. I got a flashlight, shining towards the object, and realized it was walking on 2 legs and was covered in fur. I could not make out the facial features, but it was walking upright on 2 legs. It was well over 6.5 feet tall and very muscular, and had an arm span of a few feet when it put its arms out. I pointed the light at it again, and it turned and looked at us directly. It made a deep growling noise. I realized it wasn't anything I had seen before. It turned around, walking through the woods towards the creek. I tried to get more of a look at it, but could not. My wife and I got into the tent and stayed awake the rest of the night. We didn't hear anything else until around 6 in the morning, when we heard a similar howl and the sounds of branches being violently torn off trees. We also thought we heard something big moving in the creek nearby, but did not get up to look. We got up, packed up everything, and left the campground without ever seeing anybody at the campground the night before. We were the only ones there that night. Nobody had ever been there when we were camping. We left and never said anything to anybody until now. I just want to find out if anybody else has seen something like what we saw. We only told a few friends after all that we know and can trust, and now wanted to tell you. My wife and I are not into the paranormal, but can't think of anything else that this could have been. In January of 2005, my ex-wife and I went ice fishing on the Red Lake Indian Reservation in northern Minnesota. We left our truck by the side of the lake and began walking around the lake to find a spot to set up our gear. I was the first to notice a strange-looking man-like shape walking on the ice. It walked on 2 legs, was as tall as a man, and had 2 huge glowing eyes. It was also very thin. I kept looking at the frozen lake, thinking that I must have been seeing things, but it was gone. My ex-wife noticed it too, and wanted to go home. We decided to stay and fish. When I saw it again, I called it out to her, and she ran to the truck. I was afraid to go into the woods to retrieve my gear. My wife was very upset and wanted us to leave right away. We dropped off our equipment and left. When we arrived back home, I did some research on the internet and found the others have seen some strange, unusual beings similar to what we saw. My wife and I decided that it was finally time to tell somebody what we saw. We don't go back there anymore. I live on the Red Lake Indian Reservation in northern Minnesota. I've been hearing stories of this creature called the Gaki, and it has been circling my house, making a disgusting gurgling sound. Well, the other night, I was trying to get some sleep and I heard something coming towards my door. I took a peek, but it stopped right as it came underneath my window. I seen a large black creature with a large oval-shaped head. It let out a horrible loud screeching sound. I ran downstairs to call the police, but there was no answer. I'm positive it was evil. My neighbor claims that there have been a lot of disappearances lately as well, from all sorts of neighborhood pets. A friend at Red Lake called and told me that the other day she was with her father and her younger sisters, close to their home. They were crossing the road with her father in the lead, when the youngest sister pulled on her sleeve and pointed up at the swamp. She looked up and saw, standing in front of a large cedar, was what she would call a Bigfoot being. She said that it looked like a gorilla but bigger, and said that it was huge, at least 8 feet tall. She pointed. Her father also saw it, before being frightened and running back to the house to get a rifle. When they returned, the creature was gone. They have not been outside since. This area is apparently known for strange sightings and disappearances. The entire Red Lake area is, I guess. It supposedly has this mystic quality to it, or, as some of the natives have called it, a dark energy surrounding the lake. Probably a hex or something, I don't know. I just try and stay away from the area. It does not seem very safe. I was working at the post office in 1998 on the Red Lake Indian Reservation in the village of Benna, Minnesota. It was sometime between 12:30 and 1 p.m. in the early summertime. The sun was shining, and I was walking towards the town school, which was some distance away, maybe 3/10 of a mile. I saw something that looked like a huge hyena walking across the road into the woods on the other side. I can't say that I saw it very clearly, however. It would have been taller than my 6-foot-tall brother, to be visible at all, and looked to be maybe taller. By the time that I had gotten up enough nerve to walk over there to where I thought it had gone, I heard this thing fairly close to me in the woods. It sounded like it was growling, walking around on 2 feet or 2 legs, and seemed constantly aware of me. I don't know what it was, but it was large, hairy and dark, maybe black. It also seemed to be nosing along the ground. I was afraid to go over where I thought it was and left. At the time of this incident, I was stationed at Camp Ripley and working as a mail person to the Air Force personnel stationed at the base. I was coming into the village of Benna one afternoon and was on my way to the post office to pick up mail. My husband, then boyfriend, and I left a church picnic in the early 1980s in Chaska, Minnesota. We were headed to a friend's house just a few miles outside of Chaska. There was a full moon that night. As we approached what we call the Hollandale Swinging Bridge, we saw a huge winged being land on a large cement post that supports the bridge. This is also near the edge of a cornfield at the time. The creature appeared to be black. My husband, who was a skeptic, did not want to go out to the car to investigate. The bridge was like 20 feet high, at least the cement structure, with a chain of rope. The chain was about all that would stop something from jumping off the bridge, but the creature, perched on the post, looking in the direction of the road from which we had just come from, was like it was waiting for something or somebody. It was huge. My husband and I's best estimation was that it was simply as large as a Volkswagen. The wings were spread out wide, and the moonlight glinted off its wings. It made a noise that sounded kind of like a crow but much deeper. We were both pretty scared. After a few minutes, it soared off toward the south direction, flapping its wings and gliding. After this, we headed on towards a friend's house to stay the night. The next day, we were headed home and were passing that same area. I rolled down my window, looking for any sign of the creature. There were these bizarre large black feathers everywhere on the ground right near that post. I made my husband stop, as I collected as many as I could. I kept them, later giving them to my father. I think they're still in a box in the attic of the house that he and my mom are in. He thought they were beautiful, but I don't know if they were ever tested to see if they were from this creature or not. My husband and I were so scared, we did not tell anybody about it, other than my father, so I'm not sure if anybody would believe us. We have both joked about it from time to time, but it was something we really believe had happened. Again, it was a huge creature with bat-like wings, and we both saw it and were scared by it. I'm still not sure if it had feathers because where else would these feathers come from? My husband's only regret was that he did not get out of the car to inspect it. On a warm summer night in June 2016, I and my fiancée were returning from a trip to a nearby town. I was driving, she in the passenger seat, as usual. There was a sky full of stars and a full-lit moon. We were not paying much attention to our surroundings to notify us of a change in the landscape. I started to notice things like streetlights were now a little further apart than normal, which means we were driving through some more open country. Of course, we were still on our well-lit stretch of road. It was now about 10:30 p.m., and this part of Minnesota is well known for strange creatures, or so I've been told, but never really believed that until this night. I tended to be more of a skeptic, but after this, I'm thinking a little bit more open-minded. We came up to a sharp curve in the road. I slowed down. As we were making our way around the bend, there it was. A huge, light brown, length of the body on the side of the road, standing on its back legs. The creature was roughly 8 feet tall and seemed to be as wide as a grizzly bear. I had no idea what it was, but it was standing on 2 legs, and as we passed, it turned its head to look at us. It had no visible neck, just a head and a very human feature. Unfortunately, the time it took to turn its head and look at us, I did not have the time to look over at my fiancée to gauge her reaction. But I did look back in the rearview mirror, and it watched us drive away. It was what I would call a Bigfoot. It kinda had this post-apocalyptic look to it. not like any animal I know of, just gigantic and powerful looking. And finally, it turned back around and continued the way it was going before we came, or where I assumed it was going. If that thing, for whatever reason, decided to be aggressive, it could have easily taken down our vehicle. We had an experience this past weekend, July 9th, at our summer cottage here near Pine Island State Forest, and I thought it might be of interest to you. We normally live in the Twin Cities, but head to our family's cottage on the weekends all throughout the summer. On Saturday, around 6 p.m., my wife and kids all went to the Mud Lake Pavilion down the road from our cottage to listen to live music. I stayed at the cottage to clean up, get ready for dinner. It was about 7:30 p.m. when I walked out of the cottage onto our front porch to get a breath of fresh summer air with some freshly ground coffee in hand. As I was looking out into the woods, I saw a very large black dog looking in my direction, but peering through the window by the front door of the cottage. It was standing there looking. I was initially quite shocked because I've never heard of a black dog that large in this area. It was also further away than I thought. I could only see it out of the right eye and tilting my head about 90 degrees, but it was still far off. As far as I know, black dogs are not prevalent in the area. As soon as I realized what I was looking at, I felt this overwhelming feeling of sorrow. It then ran off. I was in utter shock and still am. I then told my wife about the incident, and she did not believe me at all. I felt terrible when my son himself disclosed that he had seen something like that on our previous trip this summer. I checked the windows the following morning, realizing that the window the creature was looking through is within at least 10 feet of the edge of the property. The cottage is situated in a small clearing with woods all around. By the next day, I had convinced myself that I must have just been mistaken in what I saw. So I went armed with binoculars to look for what I had seen. I was determined to find some sort of evidence. As a kid, I'd played in the woods my whole life and have encountered many animals, so I could differentiate between a duck or a deer or a coyote or wolf. I also know that a bear would be very difficult to miss in the area. I had not heard any rumbling or crashing of a bear. In fact, the first thing that jumped out at me was a tree branch that was bent backwards towards the cottage. In my mind, this was not caused by a bird or a squirrel because there was not any damage to the tree itself. I couldn't be sure if it was caused by a strong wind or possibly this creature. I then noticed a plethora of small orange flags lining an area in the woods in the direction of the cottage. These flags are landmarkers for surveying purposes. The flags were roughly 10 feet apart. It hit me then that this area was an old farm field. This surveyor activity was fairly unusual to me, but I couldn't pass on the opportunity to view the property more closely. I walked in the direction of the cottage, and once I had arrived, I noticed another small hill which was not apparent to me before. I climbed the hill and can see the entire farm field from here. There were more orange markers and also what looked like a well filled with large stones. Just a few feet away, more orange survey flags positioned on top of a tree stump. I explored a little further, and then heard a sound. It was a series of growls and loud grinding sounds that I'd never heard. I'd been so involved in my search that I did not notice a small group of deer grazing in the field not far from me. Immediately they took off, and I heard the loud grunt/grinding noise again, but this time much closer. I looked down a ravine in the woods through the trees, and I could see there a large black animal with brindle-like patches. I could see the top of its back and the head. It was definitely canine-like, whatever I was looking at. It was not a bear. It was standing on its back legs, and although it was not tall enough to be as large as my observation the evening before, it would have to be at least 6 feet standing in order to be able to see over my windowsill. The creature then dropped to all fours and ran deeper into the woods. I was not going to follow it. It happened so quickly, but I had a clear view of it as it ran through the woods. I was in shock. I did not go into the woods and try to follow it. I had stayed out there for well over an hour. I was confused, but immediately created a map to document my findings. I noted the location of all my observations, as well as what I'd heard. I'm grateful that I made the observations, because I am now a believer. I know there are other creatures out there that we are not aware of. I was traipsing around the burned-over mountains west of Duluth, Minnesota, in June of this very year. I had been camping and hiking in the backcountry by myself. Stupid, I know. For 2 days and making my way back down towards my pickup, when I saw movement ahead of me. I stopped, and after 20 seconds, a 7-foot-tall biped with long arms, big hands, and a massive head looked at me, then continued on to walk back into the trees. It never uttered a sound or a noise, but its eyes and facial movements were very human-like. I got out of there, drove back to the St. Louis River. I've been back up to the area now 4 times since then and saw it again in August, but never saw it again after that. St. Louis River is a large creek that runs through the Arrowhead Wilderness. It is known for fishing and canoeing. In June and July, the woods are burned from forest fires, and you could see pretty far. In August, the leaves begin to shade the ground, and you can only see about 40 yards deep into the woods. The St. Louis River in question is an actual river flowing near Duluth, a northern city in Minnesota, located on the western part of Lake Superior, the largest of the Great Lakes, which is located in the northern part of the United States. There have been some claims of bipedal activity in this area, including a similar encounter in nearby Carlton County, a North Shore in Duluth, and in the Superior National Forest. There has also been reports of what many believe to be a juvenile Sasquatch being observed near the Boundary Waters canoe area. Those who know the area well are aware of the numerous sightings and reports of activity in the area. There have also been reports of a large bipedal creature in the Arrowhead region that was speculated to be an offshoot of the Minnesota Bigfoot, a bipedal creature that has been being spotted since the early 70s, and even before then. One thing is for sure, there certainly is a great mystery surrounding the entirety of the state. In the winter of 2019, on the Chippewa Reservation in Minnesota, my boyfriend was out hunting for deer and was headed home. He came to an opening in a clearing, seeing a large red-eyed bat-winged being with a large round head. He was so terrified that he ran home. I was there, and he even told me what had happened. We were both scared because of what he saw. We have never seen anything like this before. Please help us. This being was so large in size, it was huge. I'm certain it was not an owl. The head was far too round. The wings were large and the eyes red and were glowing. We've never seen anything like this before. It's not a joke. I know my boyfriend. He does not lie to me. Please help us. I'm scared we will see this again. This sighting happened right around the Chippewa Reservation. Back in the summer of 1986, I was with friends on Red Lake Indian Reservation in Minnesota. We were going to a house around 10 at night, a friend's house. We saw a bright light in the sky and bailed out of the car. There were 3 of us. The rest of the group was about 100 yards down the road on the other side. The light was coming in and out of sight. We could not figure out what it was. The light was pulsating, getting bigger and brighter. We were all freaked out. The light was moving back and forth, almost like it was searching for us. It got in front of us and stopped. It started to form into a large circle. The middle section of the circle began to light up. The light was all around us. It was like a cloud that surrounded us. I felt my entire body going numb, like this cold feeling. I felt like I lost all feeling, and the next thing you know, this light consumed us. It was a white, pure light, like the sun. I lost sight and feeling. There were no shadows, no floors or ceilings or walls, just pure white light and a coldness all around. Then I felt a presence, but it was calming and peaceful, also overwhelming. It was like I was in limbo, in purgatory. I could not see or hear anything. Out of nowhere, all these images of my life came back to me, past, present, and almost felt like future, or alternate lifelines that I could have lived, if that makes any sense. Naked, in a field somewhere is when I woke up, convinced I had never died. We were near the nearest town of Red Lake, about 15 or so miles away from White Bear Lake. It's that simple. We woke up, butt naked in a field, grassy, having no idea how we got there. But we all shared similar experiences. I can remember it exactly how we woke up. There was a fence right beside us and deep woods across the field. There was a tall oak tree and a shed. We were all naked, and our clothes were nowhere to be found. We all had miscellaneous burn marks on our shoulders and back. We all woke up at the same time, not really understanding what happened. I never felt so vulnerable and afraid. It felt so surreal, like it was a dream. And I kept trying to look up after that and see any lights in the sky, but nothing ever happened. Embarrassingly, we had to flag down a car to get help. Fortunately, it was an elderly man who picked and stopped us up, and I'm sure he was wondering why he found 3 naked 20-year-olds out in the middle of a field doing nothing. Probably thought we were hippies, but I feel like he didn't really ask questions and was just understanding to get us help. We've always tried to justify that night as a large dream or maybe some mass hallucination, but it just doesn't seem possible. I have no sight or memory loss. I mean, other than the actual event itself. Everything before and after I remember quite well. I've talked to other people about my story, and their reaction is all the same: incredibility. My question is, why did this happen to us? Why did we see that light? Maybe we were chosen, or the light was looking for us. I now work in Ohio and have an answer to this. After that, I began deep diving for information on other people seeing the same thing as us. I've run across some people that saw crafts or lights though. I'm confused as to what happened. It has now changed my life and I don't know what to make of it. I found some people have had similar abduction experiences though. Whatever it was, the experience was wild. Bear with me. This might be somewhat of a long story. So here we go. To start off, I have lived in Cook County area of northern Minnesota for the past 4 years now. I am originally from the East Coast. This is when a friend invited me to her place here in northern Minnesota. I jumped at the chance to get out of the city and see some nature. Plus, I've always wanted to visit and stay in the Midwest for a while. As we approached the location, we turned down a long dirt road to finally reach her cabin. She's actually hosting a party there that night. Lots of people I don't know show up, but she wanted to invite me to some of her good friends and have a good time, so I agreed. At one point, I had my fill of beer, so I decided to take a walk out of the restaurant or bar, whatever you want to call her little set-up cantina area, to go see the lighthouse and water. Not too far away is the lake. The lake is connected to yet another lake, and a large wooden dock runs across the lakes, leading to a lighthouse in the distance. As I was walking down the dock, coming around a corner, I could see it in the distance, the lighthouse, and then I heard a huge splash. My heart instantly began racing, thinking the worst and thinking it was a bear. And out of nowhere, a creature comes out of the water, running up on the other bank. It was tall and white. I watched in amazement as it disappeared, and then I ran back to the bar or cantina. When I got inside, I told my friend what had just happened, and of course I got a bunch of weird looks. I was just told it was probably a doe, but that doesn't make sense. It was not a deer. I've seen deer. This was tall and skinny and white, and it definitely looked more human. I don't know what it is or where it came from, but I'm glad it did not attack me or even see me. Not my story, but actually a close friend's whose identity will remain anonymous out of respect for them. He is a resident of a small town here in southern Minnesota called Jackson. It is about 35 driving minutes to the nearest major city of Rochester. It's about the size of 2 square miles. Population of Jackson is right around 1,200 people, according to the 2010 census. He lives on the south side of town and faces a rather large forest. There is a major highway to the west, called Highway 63, and to the east is a fairly busy county road called West Lake Shore Drive. The town sits along the Root River and takes up the heart of Jackson County. On the far west side of town, there is a small airport called Jackson Municipal Airport. It is 1 runway and fairly tiny. There is some type of sports club on the far east side of town. My friend woke up to his phone going off and his dogs barking. The dogs were straining at their leashes, so he brought them to the back porch. In his backyard is a large field of tall grass, and beyond that is more forest. There's also a small trail that goes into the woods, and that's where his dogs really enjoy going. But before he let them go, he saw his neighbor's dog looking out into the field as well, looking up into the sky, where his dogs were also going crazy. They were all chained up. After naturally looking up into the sky, reacting to what his dogs were reacting to, it was a little hard to make out what it was, but he claims he's seen a black thing just gliding above the treetops, maybe 30 to 50 feet or so. It was basically just flying in a straight line while looking straight down. The thing that he noticed was how thin it was. It kind of reminded him of a giant bat, or maybe a giant black bird. But his dogs were going crazy, straining at their leashes and looking straight up into the woods. He looked for a more minute or so, and finally went inside, bringing his dogs in. When he got back inside, he heard a loud bang right outside of his south-facing window. When he went to the window and peered out, there was a baseball-sized rock that had shot down from this thing into his lawn. He and his dogs went out after 10 minutes. The rock, or a little meteorite, whatever he described it as, was now gone, but the small crater it made was there. As he was walking back inside, he noticed there was something else. This strange liquid that was all over his backyard. He said it was more like sap, is how he described it. It was very thick, almost a translucent yellow, and very pale, also very slimy. And after a while, it completely dissipated. It was very strange and disturbed him greatly. The next day, he talked to his neighbors, and the neighbor also mentioned the loud noises, and that same pale yellow gelatinous goo. He said his dogs heard it too, and he also saw the strange liquid. That's when they both realized, whatever this was, it could not have been normal, and it affected both of them. They both think it might be aliens, but they're not sure. I know this guy, and I could assure you he does not want any sort of attention for this. He just pretty much puts it behind him. I think it's cool, though, that there might be other people who have seen this thing. In 1973, we lived on the outskirts of Minneapolis, and we were into seeking out ghosts and using Ouija boards. We were only about 15. We were with a couple of friends supposedly talking to a spirit on the Ouija board. When asked what they looked like, the pointer stared at the board and began spelling out the words, "Clowler." We were freaked out that we even got a response and told them to go away, and they did. Well, the next afternoon, while at a friend's house, we were outside on the deck, across from the woods, talking about this experience from the night before. While talking, we heard a noise in the woods from the left of us. We looked up and saw a row of what appeared to be humanoids. They were about 4 feet tall, light green and blue skin, large heads with almost no neck. And the next thing you know, they slowly moved behind the trees and bushes until we could not see them anymore. As you can imagine, we freaked out, ran into the house and told our parents what we had seen. Again, we said, we believe we saw elves, but nobody believed us. We tried going into the woods and looking for evidence. We never found anything, but ever since we messed with that Ouija board, it seems to have opened up some sort of portal for us, some sort of magnet to these spiritual entities coming to visit. I do believe that using the Ouija board was a way for us to find the things out there that we did not realize how it would ultimately affect us. Oh, and one last thing. Apparently, Clowler is the last name of a man who used to live in this house years and years ago. Apparently, he was also heavily into the occult and would perform rituals involving human sacrifice, torture, and worse. His victims including animals and small children. God bless their souls. He committed suicide as believed to be part of a ritual in the early 1940s. I didn't find this information out until way later, but it certainly made my skin crawl after learning about all this stuff all these years later. I almost wonder if the demon possessing or controlling him is the spirit we spoke to. Back in the late 70s, I encountered a large cloaked or transparent creature in Otter Tail County, Minnesota. I was about 14. I told my friends about it, but they laughed. I didn't hear about the Bigfoot sighting seen along the river in Otter Tail County until the early 2000s. I wonder if it's the same creature. Anyway, not too long after dusk, I was walking towards my house from a friend's house. I went down an alley to get home, and from the corner of my eye, I thought I saw somebody standing in the alleyway, so I looked over. What I saw terrified me. I still remember it, as if it were yesterday, even though it's been all these years. What I saw was a huge creature that was kind of transparent. I could see through it, but it could make out its shape, and it was kind of glitching in and out, if that makes sense. Actually, it reminded me a lot of the movie that had not come out yet at the time, but that I would later see as Predator. How, in the movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Predator, or whatever creature it was, began cloaking itself, and you can kind of see how shapes in time and space bend around it, but would sometimes flicker in and out, going from cloaked to how you could see the creature. That's almost to the T of what I saw, except obviously I didn't see the Predator, but this creature. It looked like a cross between a man and a dog, sort of like a werewolf from the movies. It was slightly stooped forward, like it was going to pounce on me, and it was howling as it stared. It had large pointed ears, and its teeth were bare and exposed. I remember it having very wide shoulders. The scary part was that it had claws on its hands, which it was showing me as it howled. I took off running, and I never looked back, even though I kept expecting to feel its claws down my back, but I don't think it chased me. I got to my backyard and I stopped to catch my breath. I never did look back. I remember feeling that it was still there in the alley watching me, but I did not want to take the chance of looking back again. I was careful when walking in the dark since then. I've never seen it again. I'll never forget what I saw. As far as that creature goes, it just vanished in thin air, like it just disintegrated. So, I don't know if these creatures are capable of cloaking themselves or whatever it is they're doing, but it scared me pretty badly. I saw a bipedal wolf here in Minnesota about 8 years ago. I was at my parents' house. I was coming from my sister's house, which is only about 2 miles away. It was dark, and I was unarmed. I was about 40 yards from it when I saw it. Now, when I first saw it, we looked at each other directly in the eyes. It was skinny, dark gray, and had very long arms. It was also on all fours when it saw me, and then stood up on its hind legs like a human would. It had a strange-shaped head and huge jaws. It didn't make any noise or any smells that I could remember, but I could not move. I was frozen in place. I was just standing there, lost in its gaze. It turned away and ran. When I came to, I decided to floor it back to my parents' house. Now, my parents' house and my sister's house lie on one side of the lake in Chissago County, Minnesota. I have also lived around a lake too, and I hunt quite a bit. I am a very well-versed woodsman and have never been afraid of anything in the woods, but this thing freaks me out to this day. So, the question is, what was it? I live in a small town here in central Minnesota. I've been here all my life. I've been fishing and hunting in the area around my town my entire life as well. I'm an avid outdoorsman. I know almost every animal that lives here in Minnesota. We have had a wolf population in our state for a long time. I've even cooked wolf meat multiple times for family and friends, but that's not really important. I also have seen Sasquatch and Bigfoot in the past. So, this all being said, after all the experiences I have in the wild, I know what I see and I know what animals inhabit the area where I live. On Friday, the 19th of March, I decided to go fishing on a lake that is between 30 to 40 miles from where I live. The lake is called Redacted. It has a huge body of water that goes north and south. I fished until dark and decided to head home. As I was heading north on the lake, I was going through some water that was a little more shallow. That was when I saw the most unusual animal I've ever seen. It was an animal on its rear legs walking the south side of the lake. It looked right back at me and then took off. I've never seen a type of animal like this, and I know it was not a type of bear or wolf. I've seen those animals thousands of times during my lifetime. I've tried to process what I saw, and the only thing I can know is it's bipedal. I still go to that lake, fishing whenever I can, with and without my shotgun. I'm pretty comfortable, even if that thing shows itself. I guess I should be prepared next time. There is something weird, though, in that area on the lake. I don't know if it's a cryptid or a Sasquatch or what it is, but I think there might have been others that have seen it before. So, with all this said, I thought reaching out to you would probably be the best case scenario for me. Any help you can offer would be great. Around 1997, I was at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. I don't remember the exact year for sure, but I believe it was either 97 or 98. We ended up transferring north to Minnesota for the time being. I was then part of a demonstration team there, and this happened one night late in the summer. We were practicing the night field. We had a long rubber mat that we used just for night missions. We were running the night field. It was late and quite dark out, as you can imagine. We were all spread out, about 100 yards apart, about 40 of us or so. The captain would blow his whistle, and we'd all come together. Well, we were doing that, and out of nowhere, we saw something, blood and animal parts, hitting the walls on the training grounds. It almost hit the captain directly in front of us, and landed maybe 15 yards away from him. It was a severed torn leg of a deer, and several other torn body parts of animals. Lots of blood as well. This is the only time I've ever seen the captain confused and terrified. He couldn't even speak. He had tried to stop us from moving forward, but it all happened so quickly. And then, not only the stench of blood and death filled the area, but a more disgusting smell also filled our nostrils. It smelled like if hell was an odor. We all saw it next. A human-like creature. Right near the tree line where everything had been thrown over. And what I saw, I'll try to do my best to describe. It had huge claws or mandibles and was very lanky, very tall and very slender, but also black and white. It's the only time I've ever seen anything like that. It's like if you crossed a human with an insect and, I guess, a cat or a panther. The captain actually ended up shooting at it, but it disappeared long before he could even get a hit on it. We evacuated the training area and were told to not speak about the incident. We really don't have any answers, and it still stands out as one of the most bizarre memories to this day. The following day, we never spoke of it, not with each other or to the captain. It's almost as if it never even happened. And in fact, our training continued the following day, but in a completely separate area. And to this day, that is the only time that I've ever seen something so weird. This is probably the one and only time in my life where I really regretted going camping. So, my experience happened just a few years back when I was at a campground that I was very familiar with. I was camping with a few friends up here in Minnesota. We were camping at this campground for about 4 days. I had never had any issues with the forest before, and I've been there many, many times. I've even seen some wildlife, but that's to be expected. This weekend, however, was different. It was dark and very oppressive. I'll admit it, I was spooked. We decided to first have a few drinks around the campfire. I mean, what's a camping trip without a little booze? It was late, but I was not yet tired, and the alcohol had not yet worn me down. So, we decided to sit by the campfire until it was time for bed. Now, it was about 2 to 3 in the morning, and I was still not tired enough, so I figured going on a night walk would do it. Getting some fresh air would also help me sober up before bed. I was walking around the camping spots, and I noticed that my friends were all asleep. So I decided to go walk the trail by the river, which was a good 20 minutes away from my camp. So I walked down a trail, and at this point, I'm pretty sobered up. And I see about 50 feet in front of me what appeared to be, now bear with me, what I would estimate to be a 7-foot-tall panther moving around on all fours. It looked exactly like that, a large black panther. And when I say 7 feet tall, I'm talking about a massive creature. Imagine a black panther the size of a moose. Yeah, that huge. And it had these shining emerald green eyes. It took me by surprise. I practically froze in spot. I didn't move for 2 minutes. I was terrified. I was already kind of spooked about the night, but this was something else. I slowly began walking backwards, and when I started walking backwards, it turned its attention, staring in my direction. I remember feeling so mesmerized by its emerald eyes, I could not look away, until finally, my body just reacted. I bolted, running all the way back to camp in probably record time, faster than what an Olympic runner would be able to manage. When I got back to camp, one of my friends had gotten up to stir the fire. I told him, but he was not really convinced. He gave me crap for drinking too much, but I told him, I have never in my life been so intoxicated or have any alcohol in my system that I would see this black panther in the middle of nowhere. I heard some loud noises after that, and it sounded like this thing was around. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. Maybe it was just my paranoia, but this sighting definitely happened. Okay, well, that's the first one. The second one, I can't exactly remember where it happened, but I do and am 100% sure it was in southeastern Minnesota. I was at a camping site, and same thing, my friends and I were all sitting at the fire, and I could have sworn that I saw this huge coyote running all across the campsite apart from us, when all of a sudden it stops, right in this other spot. Now, I thought this was weird because it was acting very out of character, and what happened next proves it. It stood up on both legs and began looking over in our direction curiously. I've never in my life seen a coyote stand up on 2 legs, not like this. And believe me, this time there was no alcohol consumption. I was with my family, friends, and kids. This also happened afterwards. Convinced that this thing or person or pranker in a costume was going to attack us, I quickly escorted my kids in the tent and grabbed my gun, not exactly sure what was going to happen. I slowly began to pack up just in case that I wasn't sure what was going to happen. Then, out of that, in the corner of my eye, I see more movement. It's another one, completely different in color, more reddish. It was walking right up to the next one, the other one, and they both pop up on 2 legs and stare in our direction, looking back at each other like they were communicating, like they were plotting something. Now, I knew deep down, I had to get out of there. There are a million explanations as to what it could have been, but not a normal coyote. I could not believe it. Fortunately, they disappeared and I sat up by the fire all night long, not sleeping once. I kept my revolver in my hand the entire time. In the morning, I just told my family it's time that we move campsites. Surprisingly, they did not question me and they understood. I would later lie to them and tell them that it was a large bear that was around the area, and I wanted us to be safe. I'm still not sure what to make of these encounters myself. Does anybody else have any input they could give? Thank you.